All right, everyone. Welcome to the Leaders Cafe, our concluding event for 2022, Trendspotting 2023, leadership trends to look out for. And I am excited, I am happy, and I'm looking forward to this chat with a leader that I have enjoyed listening to over the last few years. I'd like to take a moment to quickly welcome Satya Raghavan from Google. And Satya, of course, is a senior accomplished leader at Google with more than 20 years of experience. While in his role, he leads and heads marketing, amongst other things. I have known Satya, I've experienced Satya to be somebody who's who's extremely people oriented and very invested in developing people. And I say that, Satya, because of our association with you being the sponsor for one of the women leadership programs that we ran. And every time we've heard you speak, it's just been such great insights that you've brought to the conversation. So when our team and I were thinking about, who do we call in for this concluding event, it was actually Sandra's idea. Sandra said, it has to be Satya. Let's speak to Satya and see if he's available. So thank you so much, Satya, for making time. I know you've got a lot on your plate. I know with Sundar being in India, you mentioned it's been a hectic last few days for you, but you were still able to make time for this. So really appreciate your coming here and welcome.
Yeah, thank you so much, Gatik. And I got that email from Sandra, and I didn't take more than a minute to say yes. Normally, it's always about, okay, let me check my calendar, let me figure out if I'm traveling. But I was very keen to do this, primarily because I've loved interacting with you, Sandra, everyone else at Transform. The program that you refer to is a signature program within Google called Evolve, where we are focusing on women managers and future women leaders, and how is it that we can train them, how is it that we can give them exposure to various perspectives and various different ways of growing themselves as leaders. And this is something that me and a few of my colleagues kind of put together last year. It's in its second year this year, and we did it in the thick of the pandemic. So it was all virtual, and even the people hadn't the opportunity to meet each other. But this year it's become even better. We are back in our offices, and we are firmly on our way to ensuring that our talent have the best possible investment from Google to help them shape their careers. So yeah, it's an absolute pleasure. I too enjoy the difference that Transform Me gets to the table. I've worked with a lot of companies who do a lot of capability building programs, but I liked the human touch that all of you brought to the table. So it's a pleasure to do this.
Thanks so much, Satya. That feels so nice coming from you. Really appreciate that. We have received feedback, but it feels really nice receiving that from you. And and I did share this with you earlier, Satya, and this is for everybody else who's watching on LinkedIn Live. When we started, ever since we started LinkedIn Live, uh, the driver, the mission really for Transform Me has always been to bring conversations that matter, to really bring conversations that matter and bring in perspectives that matter. So for us, it's really been a lot of thinking about, okay, what is it that people want to talk about, especially in this space of people development, and then the second question is really who do we bring in to get perspectives in, and as we draw to close 2022, um, you know, it was clear who better than Google to talk about some of the trends to look forward to. You guys set the trends for the world to follow in many ways. So, as we talk about leadership trends for the future, Google is obviously top of the mind for us. And who better than you to talk about leadership realities and leadership trends? So, thanks once again. And the way I was thinking, Satya, we could do this, and this is a freewheeling conversation, a casual chat. And the way I was thinking we could do this is they say that it's helpful to reflect on the past before you jump onto the future, right? And while this is about trend spotting for 2023, and we'd love to hear from you, what what is it that you see coming up in 2023 as leadership trends?
Mhm.
Maybe we invest a bit of time, a few minutes, just taking stock of 2022. And I would also love to personally hear from you. For example, 2022 has been a pretty important year for everybody, right? And we were just
Yeah.
talking about it before the live started, coming out of the pandemic, and a lot has been spoken about it, and so on and so forth. But I'd love to hear from you. What have been some of your key reflections from 2022, from a leadership perspective? What have been some things that have shaped leadership and shaped work in 2022?
Yeah, absolutely. And glad to speak about this, right? And again, let me take a few steps back and actually go back to 2019, which is when we were all getting ready for this magnificent decade to come, right? Which is starting in the 2020s in that sense. But our best laid plans didn't exactly work out because of the pandemic. And all of us suddenly, in the month of March 2020 or thereabouts, were really faced with this decision of this thing called working from home. And there are entire industries where people actually work from home and they're supremely productive. Your company, for one, most of your folks are working from home, and you then converge when there's a training, either live or virtual in that sense, right? But a whole lot of industries just didn't know what to do. And it was like the biggest challenge we are possibly going to face in the next few years is what we've gone through in the last 2 years. And I think we all surprised ourselves, and we discovered that it is possible. In some cases and in some industries like ours, we realized that we actually ended up being even more productive. But as we started doing that, we suddenly realized that yes, it looks like a whole lot of us are productive, and a lot of people started to do the math, saying that, okay, I'm going to save an hour in transit. And some of you who are probably dialing in from Noida or Gurgaon probably saved 3 hours in transit in that sense. And you are like, okay, I can use that time to be a lot more productive. But we also discovered that there's a flip side to being super productive, which is, sometimes you don't know when to stop in the evening because everything seems to be one continuum in that sense. So I think midway into 2020 we realized that, okay, we are productive, but it looks like we need to start thinking a little bit more about our well-being, especially when health was such. I mean, we never really consciously thought about getting a viral fever and all of that, but suddenly the smallest of those viruses became so important in our mind space. And we all started thinking not just about health but also about well-being, because we were trying to figure out how to balance that. So uh, in that process, one of the biggest things a lot of people discovered is that earlier the construct was that human resources, or the people team was the one who took care of your well-being. But during the pandemic, I think every manager, right, every line manager, every marketing manager, every production manager realized that no, actually they are the human resources manager for their team. And a whole lot of people suddenly started to develop a muscle that was otherwise pretty dormant. At Google, people development is actually a core OKR of every manager. So while we have a fantastic human resources team and a people operations team and so on, every manager has always been using that muscle. So I think at Google it gives us an opportunity to flex that muscle even more, because suddenly we were thinking about more dimensions than ever before. And how do we make our managers even more capable? How do we impart training to them? And that's how we connected, and we did the entire program during the pandemic. So I think one of the biggest things that I feel will dictate the coming decade is every manager is actually now not just a line manager, but also a people manager. And in that, I feel that we might have actually created um, a, a reservoir of people development that was not happening earlier, right? We would always look at it as something that we would outsource. But I feel, having done that for a couple of years, a whole lot of people are going to realize that, hey, it's something that's going to come to us a whole lot naturally. And my dad would always tell me that only the wearer of the shoe knows where it bites. So as a line manager, you are the one who knows your team the best. You're the one who knows, what skills one member of your team needs most. And I feel, now that you also have a sense of ownership, and now you've also developed a people development muscle, I feel it's going to be very good for your team members. So my message would be, exercise that muscle. Take on people development as an OKR, whether you're a line manager or whether you're a human resources manager. I feel it's good that there's going to be so many more eyes on, the newer generation, and they're going to get skills and capability development from many different perspectives now.
Yeah, and I love what you said, Satya. First of all, I love what your dad said about only the what is that? Only the wearer of the shoe knows where it
Knows
bites
where
the
it
most.
lies. Yeah.
And that's so true, right? And as you think of managers and leaders, obviously as managers and leaders, we're the best people to know where the pain points of our people are and ours are. I think that's so powerful. And I also connect with you on this thing because health and well-being has been has been spoken about over the last decade. It's not that it hasn't been spoken about, but I think the last 2 years and perhaps 2022 in specific has just given it the due importance that it needed, right? And I heard you talk about that. And this entire bit that you spoke about and is very close to our heart at Transform Me as well, and personally for me, that each manager, each leader plays a role in enabling their people, not just training and coaching them, but really enabling them and
Yeah.
working through with them. And I think 2022, 2021 has perhaps taught us that. In my view on this is, and I don't know what you feel about it, Satya, but my view is that that's always been the case in letter,
Hmm.
which means even pre-pandemic, if a people manager leader had to say the right thing, they would say the right thing. They would say that it's not HR that takes care of people. Every manager is a leader. People would say that. So it's not that we haven't heard that before. I think we've heard that before, that every leader. But I think your point is so relevant that I think the last 1 or 2 years, people have moved beyond the letter and lived that in spirit.
Yeah.
And like you said, flexed the muscle at Google, because at Google, every people manager has that in their OKR. So I think while it's something that's been spoken about and written about, it's been in letter. It's truly perhaps been in spirit only in the last 1 or 2 years that managers and leaders have, really perhaps realized, understood, figured out that they play this role and they can contribute in a significant way to their people, and it doesn't just sit with HR or learning or whatever. I think that's
Yeah.
a great insight. And I think one thing that I'm taking away from what you said in the first one is that the analogy of that reservoir that you said that has been built. I think that's so powerful, because if in the last 1 or 2 years organizations and people managers and leaders have started flexing that muscle, then in a way organizations have created that reservoir, right? My only hope and my fear a little bit and hope is that people realize that that reservoir exists and continue to utilize those skills
Yeah.
as the world changes again, and we don't fall back to the whatever the old normal, so to say,
No,
right?
absolutely right. And I think the opportunity now is to structure it, right?
Yeah.
For example, you would have always heard about people, at maybe slightly higher levels of management seeking external coaches.
Hmm.
But now I think the opportunity is to actually create coaches within companies,
Yeah.
and tap into those skills, right? I mean, there are some people who would have obviously realized that you actually enjoy looking out for people and going that extra distance, right? And they will actually make for very good coaches. So if as an HR manager or an HR leader, the opportunities to then structure programs within your organization and draw on the best of the folks who are willing to give that extra time, willing to go that extra mile, and actually let them become coaches for the rest, right? And that also develops a whole lot of other skills in the coach itself, right? So I think it's a win-win in that sense. But yeah, now is the time to structure a whole lot of these things.
Yeah, I like what you said because I hadn't thought of this earlier, but as you say it, I'm just reflecting because as we speak to some of our clients as well, when we're doing these leadership interventions with them, we do coaching. More and more organizations now, and it's actually quite interesting, more and more organizations now want their leaders to be more involved in the journeys than ever before.
Yeah,
Because I think to your point, they've realized that that's a reservoir that exists, and we've got to leverage it either as internal coaching programs, mentoring programs, so on and so forth. So yeah, that's a good message as well. Leverage them in interventions. You've got that reservoir there. And uh, partly we've spoken about 2022, and also kind of a little bit about what you feel about the future of leadership, and you've spoken about each people manager owning this bit. um, and if we were to just take a pause and say, all right, let's sit here and let's do some crystal ball gazing here, and as you sit right now, Satyan, as you look at 2023, what is it that you are most excited about, specifically in the space of leadership? When you sit here and you look at 2023 from the Google lens, from your leadership lens, what is it that you're most excited about? I'm curious to know that now.
yeah. I think one of the other things that really happened in the pandemic was exactly what we're doing right now, right? So this conversation is going to be watched by more people than if we had done it in a closed room setting,
True.
right? So I think the kind of technology that we all now have access to, whatever platform you're using, allows you to actually reach so many more people, right? So I think that's one thing which I feel will multiply that reservoir of coaching that you can do, right? Um, the second thing really is that I feel um, during the pandemic, whenever we would do this kind of a conversation virtually, we are using a background screen today, but otherwise you actually were able to see into the other person's life, right? In that sense, you were actually transported into their living room. It led there are many instances which went viral on the net about all the things that were funny about that
Correct, correct.
setting, of course, but truly you were able to actually see the other person in a wholly in a whole different light, right? In that sense, you became intimately aware of sometimes the kind of settings they were in, their families, right? I mean, there were so many instances when my daughter would come and sit literally on my lap. She's fast outgrowing that, but she would literally come on my lap and she would actually chat with somebody in my team, and things like that. So I feel we got to know each other a lot better. Again, that allows us to think about people very differently, right? And you know so much more about them. They would always say that as a manager you should know the birthdays and the names of all the children, but suddenly you knew that, right? You didn't have to make an effort, but they were in front of you. So I feel that now that we've kind of come back, our conversations are actually a lot more interesting, because people know who you are and people know where you're at and people know where you've come from. A whole lot of people actually moved to their native places, so suddenly you actually got to see where they were actually, where they grew up. I mean, I'm fascinated by all of those things, and I feel that that's just made us better teams now that we've come back. We are able to empathize with each other a lot more. So yeah, I feel that I'm excited for what technology can do, and I'm excited for what human connections and stronger human connections can do for the future.
Yeah, I think that's so apt. You're right. Somebody had said this to I think somebody had shared this with Sandra once, that when we do these things virtually, it's literally like I'm inviting you into my house. you know and we've literally invited so many people to our houses, and yeah, I think leaders have understood context of people better. The other side of that, I don't know how true that is, but we see a lot of organizations talk about, maybe they're struggling, maybe they're not, but talk a lot about the focus on belongingness. And I think that's become a increasingly an important thing, right? From diversity to inclusion to a sense of belongingness. And this just spinning off from what you said, Satya, and again, just curious. I have a perspective on it, but I'd love to maybe chat with you and get your sense on this. while the future and technology is going to enable that, and you're excited about how technology can enable that, and so am I. I continue to be a little bit of a in-person person, meet and kind of finding that balance,
Yeah.
the truest sense of hybrid. But how do you see belongingness, or the focus on belongingness, in the year 2023? What role do you see leaders playing there? Is that important at Google as well? Is that a big topic for you folks as well? Because I know a lot of our viewers watching this globally, I'm sure many of them are in organizations where belongingness is an important theme for them to explore. Any insights from you from a trend spotting perspective? What do you think the future of belongingness looks like? And what do you think the leader driving belongingness looks like? Any views on that, Satya?
Yeah, yeah, and we saw this in the first part of the year in 2022. It was, I think, around May when we all decided that we'll start coming back to work, and we started doing it in a hybrid manner. And till date at Google, we are coming in 3 days of the week, and working from home the other 2 days, because a whole lot of other operational things start happened during the pandemic. Some people move to different cities, and all of that is still coming back, right? So I feel these 6 to 12 months are actually very important in re-establishing whatever culture you had in the past, right? But necessarily, reimagining culture is not just what existed in the past, but adding to it and letting it transform a little bit more, right? I feel that is an important challenge for all leaders, whether you're the CEO or the manager. um, uh, uh, I think we have to allow for the fact that this was a difficult period, and people changed, and people evolved, and now they're coming back, so it's going to be a little more difficult. So how do you then create that sense of belonging? And I feel that the enabler for belonging is actually culture, right, in that sense. And at Google, there's a lot of emphasis on not just culture, but what we call culture add, where as we hire new people, how can their culture add to existing culture, right? I think as leaders, we should not think about culture as being static, but culture as being enveloping and always growing and embracing whatever newer people bring. So, and when I say newer people, it's also people who are coming in with perhaps a different perspective now in their minds, having gone through the last couple of years in that sense. So I think culture is fundamental. Allowing that culture to envelop and grow is then even more important, right? And I think one of the things that all of us should think about in today's day and age, even harder, is are elements like diversity, are elements like equity, are elements like inclusivity. I feel um, there are so many more women in the workplace now than ever before. And I have always maintained that yeah, that women actually make for much better managers, right? I'm putting it out there. Women also make for much better problem solvers in that sense. So I feel that as you're building culture, how do you also make sure that you maintain great diversity? And a lot of see, diversity as a concept essentially has come down from the West, I would say, right? But I think there it also tends to be slightly more unidimensional. In India, diversity is actually multidimensional, right?
Mm,
um, we have we have people who speak different languages.
true.
We have people who come from different strata of society or different upbringing, right? So all of that, I feel, is what we is going to be very important in this decade, to kind of fuse together and build belongingness using all of these dimensions, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I love. I know we started the conversation from belongingness and what you see there happening, I really like this one thing that you said. And before I share that, just a quick note to the viewers watching this: if you have any thoughts, any questions, any perspectives that you want to share, or a question to ask us, please drop in your question in the comments, or your any inputs in the comments. Would love to take in a few there. But coming back to you, Satya, I really connected with this one thing that you said, that in the future and even now, we need to stop seeing culture as being static, and we need to start looking at culture as, perhaps ever evolving and inclusive. As you add people, how can their culture build that? uh, and I think in that, there's going to be a huge role for leaders and managers to play, in terms of, uh, just how we bring people in, just how we accept people in, just how we do we direct them, do we tell them that, look, this is the ways of working at Google, this is the culture, or in whatever organization, or what's the new way, how do you kind of bring them in? And that, I think, is going to be an interesting space for managers and leaders to and organizations to weave through, to figure out how do we, you know not create something that's chaotic and difficult to understand, because it's not structured and it's not put out there, and yet something that everybody feels that they can be a part of, right?
Yeah,
And that's going to be an interesting dimension to work through. And connected to that, of course, you spoke about uh, the need, you feel, is going to continue in 2023, the focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion.
yeah,
And we heard your views around women being more better managers, and better problem solvers. And I connect with that. But I'm just curious, is there an anecdote behind that? Is there where's that coming from? Can you give our viewers a glimpse of what drives that? Because I know you're extremely passionate, Satya, about diversity, equity, and inclusion. You were the sponsor of that women leadership program. You still are, right? So I know there's a lot of passion there. I'm just curious, where does that come from? Is there a backstory to that? Just curious.
yeah. I mean, my mother reportedly went back to work literally maybe a month after I was born, is what they tell me. But that was circumstantial, right? I mean, she had to go back because they had to earn a living, and and all of that, right? And most of us come from that kind of a background in that sense. But she ran a large team, and I've always seen the way in which she would manage her people. So in a lot of ways, I saw and experienced a women manager at a very young age in my life, right? Most of us probably meet women managers when we are in our 20s in that sense. But to me, it was not a new thing, when I started working in that sense, because I'd seen my mom do it for about 30 odd years. I even remember a time when there was a lockdown in her factory. So there were about she moved her entire team to our house, and
From the
that
factory?
from the factory. Yeah, so she was running the
Wow.
account department. So there were like 30 people parked in our house for like 3 months, and it was great fun for us kids, because we were obviously the center of all the attention, and we really interacted with so many people in our house for those 3 months. But yeah, I mean, to me, that's a great example of problem solving, right? I mean, work has to happen, no factory, so hey, get them home, right, and make things happen. So
Wow.
I saw it from a very young age in that sense. My earliest manager, when I started working, this is at Gen Mills, was a woman leader, and I learned so many things from her. I when I There were two startups that I've done in my life, and at both times, my co-founders were women. In that sense, I've been very lucky to learn from some amazing people in that sense, and I've seen them very closely. So I know it when I say it.
Yeah, no, no, no. I can see that, and it's written on your face, Satya. It comes with such authenticity that that smile is saying it all. And I think you thinking of your mom also brought that. I think that's such an inspiring story. Thanks for sharing that. And I think so far, some of the trends that you've shared with us is number one, the first thing, and I'm also doing a bit of a recap for people who may have just jumped onto LinkedIn Live. I think the first thing that you shared, Satya, as something that you've seen happen and something you see continuing to happen is that each manager plays a role in developing their people. It's no longer sitting with learning or HR or anything like that. And in doing so, in the last couple of years, organizations have created this reservoir of managers, many of whom are capable and want to and enjoy developing people. So organizations need to tap into that reservoir as you plan interventions. How can you leverage your internal managers and leaders to mentor, coach, and not just depend on external parties, but do something, co-create something? So I think that's the first thing that you said, which was beautiful. And you also spoke about, now that we've done that, next year we should start putting some structure to it. Now you've got that pool of managers who've demonstrated that in the last 1 or 2 years that they can take care of people. How do we structure that? That was beautiful. We spoke a bit about technology and the role that your excitement about what technology can bring over the next few years, and also the fact that culture is not static. Culture is ever evolving, and the last thing that you shared is really the fact that you believe very strongly that diversity, equity, and inclusion are going to continue to be key trends, and rightfully so, for the next few years, definitely for 2023. So yeah, and I'm seeing a few points, a few questions coming in. I think you can also see them, Satya, on the chat, and if you can't, then I can bring them up in a little while.
Yes.
We have a question, and we can address that a little later because I had one connecting thought, but I'll just share the broad question with you, and we can come back to it later. The question is really coming in from Vinay Mantri, saying that you said that leadership at Google, is around those inclined towards helping people are being used to build internal coaches. The entire reservoir thing that you spoke about, Satya, I think
Yeah.
that's what Vinay is talking about. And how do you create a platform where an employee would be comfortable to open up to someone in the same organization? Is kind of his question. But we can come back to that in a bit.
Sure.
But I just wanted to kind of throw that question up for you to think through. But just again, going back, future gazing, sitting here. So we spoke about culture, people, managers, diversity, equity, inclusion. Um, with a lot of this news around layoffs and some businesses coming under pressure, um, talks about the recession or whatever we may want to call it, and so on and so forth. There's obviously creating some level of pressure for businesses and leaders, and in that entire pressure, what is your take? And this is actually one of my favorite questions to get insights on, because I certainly don't have an answer to that, but I love getting perspectives to figure out the answer. But with all of this happening, what's your take on how leaders can or need to balance between being empathetic as leaders, which is something that we've learned over the last 1 or 2 years, and also driving high performance in this high pressure environment? So how do
Yeah.
you what's your view on leaders striking that balance between empathy and performance in the way they are being with their people? Any thoughts there?
Yeah, and first of all, I think we should all consciously step down from this pressure cooker or treadmill, right, at
Mm,
this point of time, right, and allow us time to also learn a lot more, right, in that sense. At this point of time, think about it, right? There's an entire industry which has literally started firing on all four cylinders this month, which is the travel industry. Because after like a gap of
yes.
2 years,
Oh yeah.
they're suddenly now seeing people traveling, and what's happening at the Delhi airport and things like that, right? And I still feel that unprecedented situations are going to come up in our lives, right? Suddenly, a year from now, there will be a whole lot of companies who will be sitting on triple digit growth because nothing happened in 2021, but a lot of stuff happened in 2022 and 2023. But in 2024, right, that's going to come and become a problem all of a sudden, right? What was suddenly amazing and great will become a problem in 2024 because you're like, how do you grow on such a large base? So I think the point I'm trying to make is that I still feel that the next 2 or 3 years, are actually going to be a time when we'll learn a whole lot more. So at this point of time, it's very, very important to actually strike that right balance between high performance and empathy by putting ourselves in a place where we're actually constantly learning, right? This is also incidentally the first time that post pandemic, two or three other macro factors are influencing your business in India. If you go back to 2008 2009, when that entire housing bubble loan crisis happened in the US, India was not affected at all, right? Or relatively less in that sense. um, but if you actually look at what's happening right now, there's more than one external factor which is impacting our economy. There's the war, and there's many other things happening in the world. But at this point of time, if you actually compare 2022 to 2008 2009, we are a little more impacted, no doubt about it, right? Why? Because possibly, and that's just one hypothesis, that we have a lot more export exposure today than we had in 2008 2009. Hence, the whatever happens in the rest of the world also impacts us, right? So I feel we are all getting into situations where actually no one has an answer at this point of time. So as a manager, the last thing you want is to be in a place of stress, right, while trying to deal with all of these changes around you. You are much better off if you are in a place where you say that, okay, I'm going to learn from this and I'm going to do better tomorrow, day after, next week, next year, than kill yourself or your team saying that, hey, why didn't you achieve that sales number that you were chasing, right? So the point I'm trying to make is that there are a lot of things that are uncertain. As a country, we are a little more exposed to them as than we were a few years ago. But let's not lose our shirt and sleep over it, right? Let's go into that zone where we're still learning and absorbing. We have one eye on performance, but the other eye on empathy, and be in that place, right? It's a much better place to weather the storm than to be in a place of either extreme.
Yeah, yeah, and I resonate with that, and I think uh, what you're talking about is really the fact that with so much happening and so much that we've been through, and there may be a few more hits that may happen. Um, you know, uh, the worst thing that a leader can do at this point of time is let that pressure cooker,
Yeah.
like you said, let that stress get to you. Instead, so one is don't let that stress get to you. Cope, manage, speak to somebody, figure that out. That's one. And second, tune yourself to what's really held you in good stead, which is keep learning, keep figuring out what's the best way to navigate through this, and so on and so forth. But you said something interesting a while back, and I wanted to circle back to that. And I, I I kind of get it, but I'd love to hear a little bit more about it. This thing that you said about 2023, and you took the travel example, and you said how it's booming, and 2023 is likely to be an exciting year for most businesses because of the pent up demand and whatever. And we're
Yeah.
seeing that already. I think most businesses are seeing that. And then you said 2024, that's going to pose. That can pose interesting challenges, and that's really what trend spotting is about. So, can you talk to us a little bit more about what you mean by that? How are you seeing it?
Yeah. I think, see, all of us fundamentally want to grow. All of us fundamentally want to get that promotion. All of us fundamentally then want to become a people manager. All of us want to become a CEO, right? So I think what I'm trying to say is that the next 2 years, uh, pace of growth is going to get a little recalibrated, right, in India. I'm for a minute not even suggesting that we'll grow the way America grows, which is 1 or 2 or 3%. But the pace that we've all been used to is going to get a little recalibrated in that sense, right?
Mm,
uh, I'm also not saying that we'll end up growing even faster than we did. But if you actually telescope out a little bit, I feel that your 2020 and your 2021 numbers are going to be very different. Your 2023 numbers are going to be very different. So as a CEO or as a manager, I just feel that you need to telescope a bit out, and not necessarily start thinking about either too bright a future or too bleak a future, but really try and learn from what is happening, right? In that sense, India is the place to be long, right? Uh, we have incredible growth, and if you check into a whole lot of memes out there, it talks about how we will become the second largest economy at some point of time, even overtaking the US. So now is the time to actually think a little more long, or go long on India, right? In that sense. So that's just what I meant, which is, how do you set and reset expectations a lot more consciously, rather than say that, look, it's either going to be a tough next 2 3 years, or it's going to be a great next 2 3 years, right? I would urge most leaders to actually think about this entire decade as being a decade of change, right? In that sense. So it's a I feel it's a very nuanced point in that sense. But I feel now is the time to actually think a little more long, and not just think about what's going to happen in 1 year, 2 years, but actually take a very long view on your business, take a very long view on your people, enable them to build, growth plans for them for the next 7 years. We're very
Right.
used to thinking about, building growth plans for a year and 2 years, but it might be, uh, I feel that, we'll do all ourselves a big favor by thinking a little more long about a place like India. So yeah, that's just the point I'm making.
Yeah, and I connect with that, and I think that the immediate thought that came to my mind is that one of the things that we've been doing and we've been hearing businesses talk about last 1 or 2 years has been, because you can't think long term because there's so much ambiguity. Think and plan for the short term and get this done, and take each day, each month as it comes, and so on and so forth. And now, hearing you say that while that may still hold true in some contexts, that you've got to get done what is there, but when it comes to people, when it comes to aspirations, when it comes to overall growth, have a slightly more longer term view, because the lot of blips that may happen and peaks that may happen,
Yeah.
and in the long term, India's trajectory and your people's trajectory and your career trajectory is likely to go like this. But if you break it down in shorter chunks, it's going to look like this, and you're not going to be able to make sense of it.
Yeah.
So I like that. It's a good message for people watching from HR, L&D, and even leaders around how you're kind of looking at career trajectories, progression, growth plans. Having a more longer term lens can certainly be super helpful. So perhaps we've kept Vinay waiting for a long time. If we can circle back to his question, Satya, any views? Would you like me to repeat the question for you, Satya?
No, I got his question right, and I
Yeah.
think what Vinay is saying, that look, yeah, it makes a lot of sense to build coaches internally, but do you necessarily need to think about what kind of a platform you need to? I would say, don't even worry about thinking about building a platform. Start by doing, right? In that sense, what we realized during the pandemic is that when we were actually talking to each other, we were actually seeing ourselves a lot more than we ever saw of ourselves, right?
Mm,
Because there's a video conversation going on now. You actually became a lot more cognizant about the way you were speaking, about the way you intonate, about the way you came across than ever before, right? And I feel as coaches, using the power of that technology is such a simple thing to do, right? And
yeah.
let's say you're a sales team, and a lot of your life is spent making pitches about your product to your customers and all of that, right? I would say, as a coach, the first thing you should do is just record your coachee making that sales pitch. And that in itself is so powerful, because then the coachee can actually watch themselves doing that pitch and actually figure out where is it that they can do better. And as a coach, you can then give feedback on the basis of that video, right? it's
Right.
it's such a
Right.
simple thing, but we don't do enough of that. But
Yeah.
you actually been doing that for the past 2 years. Now is the time to do it actually a lot more deliberately and consciously. So I would say, if you're running teams, you know take 2 hours and get everyone to do a sales pitch, record
Mm,
it, and just show it back to them. They will come back the next day with 2 or 3 or other areas where they realize that they can do better, right? And that's what you need to, that's what your job is as a coach, which is how can you get them to think about how they can improve themselves.
Yeah. See, the ideas that coaches get from outside in. So, Avinash, if you're watching this, our next coaching session, we should do a recording, buddy. So, I'm using this as a tip for myself as well, Satya. And but Vinay's question was an extension of what you said. His question was also about when you talk about internal people coaching each other, how
Yeah,
can you do something where people feel comfortable to open up to each other in the same organization? I think that's quite a relevant question, because when you talk about tapping into that reservoir,
yeah.
how would you make sure people feel comfortable opening up to somebody internally?
Yeah. No, I mean, as a coach, you are essentially sponsoring a safe place for everyone to be at, right? As a coach, that is your fundamental duty, right? So, and there's a lot of ways in which you can build a safe space for people. But if that safe space doesn't exist, then sharing won't happen. But as I said, right, that safe space actually started to happen during the pandemic, right? We were comfortable letting people into our lives. We were comfortable, having a parent walk by behind us. We were comfortable with a child sitting in our laps, right? In that sense. So I think that safe space is there. People have realized that it
Mm,
exists. I think as a coach, it's your duty to then sponsor it.
yeah, yeah. Great point. Thanks, Satya. And I want to. We have a few minutes left, but there's one thing that I definitely want to ask you, because you are at the core of it. While you do a lot of this stuff, you also lead marketing. That's one of the
Yeah.
spaces that you're in. And curious to hear what's within that. How do you see marketing changing? What top two, three recommendations for leaders? What's been your view around what's happening there, and any insights from there that could help our viewers?
Yeah, absolutely right. And as a marketer, let's say you are a brand manager or a CMO, for your particular product. Most people, most marketers, were very comfortable with the intersection of creative and media, right? So the marketer's job was, okay, I need to know my customer. I need to figure out the best medium or media to reach them, and I need to come up with the best creative to make that happen, right? But what has happened in the last 2 or 3 years, even more, is I feel that it's no longer just two boxes. Marketers should now think about at least four boxes, right? One box is good old media, and whether it's digital or television or whatever. The other box is your creative. The third and fourth boxes are very interesting, right? One is a technology box, and the other is a content box, right? And actually, it's at and I'm using I've created a new word, at the quadrisection, or the intersection of all of these four boxes, is where all the magic can happen for your customer. Okay, and let me illustrate that by giving an example. All of us love chocolates, right? But one of the most innovative marketer in the country today is actually Mondelez, or erstwhile Cadbury, in that sense. And I don't know if you saw or if you've been seeing a few of their campaigns, that they put out in the last couple of years. Their latest one, which has actually swept all the awards, international, Indian, is the one where they used Shah Rukh Khan as a brand ambassador, not for their product, but for shops and outlets across the country. What they did was they got Shah Rukh Khan to actually, possibly, they created one video where they got him to say, buy your saris from XYZ sari shop in so and so location. But then they used technology, and very specifically they used artificial intelligence to actually create many versions of that ad using AI. And actually they created 130,000 commercials, right? And then they use platforms like YouTube to actually you know send the sari shop commercial, which was in an area of Bombay, to only people in that area. And they sent the kirana shop commercial of a particular area in Delhi only to those consumers by targeting them, right? So
Wow.
suddenly marketers, if they start playing in you know two, three, or four of those boxes, you will realize that your ability to actually solve a problem for your consumer improves, right? So I feel that, we are pretty much at a tipping point. Marketers, you know, were perhaps never the most tech savvy in that sense, but increasingly, a whole lot of marketers have realized that, and it's such a simple thing to understand. It's not even, rocket science in that sense. It's just simple technology
Right.
in that sense. And when they put all of these four boxes together, they're actually creating a beautiful space in the middle where they're able to really efficiently, innovatively reach out to their customer, and earn not just drive not just a lot of sales, but also earn a lot more goodwill, right? So I feel that quadri section of these four boxes, which is media, technology, creative, and content, is actually pretty much redefining the way marketing will happen in the future.
I love that. And if I was to draw a paddle there and say that, okay, how does this lesson of this quadrisection of these four, how does this lesson from marketing apply to other aspects of leadership? I think I'm getting a few things, Satya. One, I'm getting they're doing this because they want to reach out to their customers better, faster, more.
Yeah.
And I think that applies to us as leaders also. How do we reach
Yep.
out and connect and create that belongingness to our people better, faster, more? Right? The lesson that marketers have learned is how do they use technology as a tool that they've not used before, and how they're evolving with that tool. And perhaps that's a lesson for us as leaders also, to see how we can use technology as a tool to enable us as leaders to drive some of these things.
Yeah.
uh, and as leaders, we may not have used it before, like marketers haven't. So that'll be interesting. So last two questions, just in the interest of time. I'm seeing a few questions coming in here, but I'll pick up one and then I've got one for you. But the one I'm picking up here, Satya, is from Karthikeyan, who's saying, great sharing. Satya, you can see that. And his quick question is, can you share how leaders in Google perceive failures when products don't do well? I think that's a great question, just how failure is dealt with.
Yeah. And in the olden days, it was never apparent that a product failed. We all knew when a product was successful, right? Because that's the only thing that you saw on the shelves in that sense. But given how technology businesses have grown, given how companies like Google, and a whole lot of other companies like that, are putting products out there, um, successes and failures are as evident today, right? In that sense. So I think we're living in a very interesting time. So as a leader, what that means is that, look, you have to treat every product launch, every product, every the life cycle of a product as a way to constantly learn, right? um, a failure today is actually teaching you a lot more than a success will, right? A pandemic, which is essentially things failing around us, taught us a lot more than what we learned perhaps in the 2010s, right? Suddenly those 2 years have taught us so many more things in that sense. So I just think that creating that, sponsoring a culture where a failure actually teaches you and makes you a better team or a better person is, I think, very important for a leader, right? And that's something that I have observed a whole lot of tech companies do very well. You don't say that, oh, that product failed and you're fired, right? That's the worst thing you can do. Why? Because all that learning is then fired, right? You're essentially firing all that learning. So how do you make sure that you're able to get teams to understand what is the true meaning of failure, is what, as a leader, you ought to be doing.
Yeah, I think there's this very interesting, I don't know whether it's a joke or a true story that I'd once heard, Satya, around this, where a CEO of a pretty large company uh, takes a decision which fails and costs the organization $500,000 or $1 million or something, right? Takes a bad decision and it fails and costs the organization $1 million. He goes to the board and he submits his resignation, and the chairman of the board tears up his resignation and said, I'm not accepting it. The CEO says, why? I've cost the organization $1 million. I took a wrong decision. He said, yeah, we just invested $1 million in your training.
Yeah.
I can't let you go now. And I think that's such a powerful perspective to have. And that's exactly what you're talking to, Satya, that, it's
Yeah.
really taking those learnings in your stride. All right. I think this has been a fabulous chat. I've enjoyed every moment of this, Satya, and I'm sure people have too. And, closing remarks, the closing question, and I've been waiting to ask you this, is really around, with everything happening again, sitting here, crystal ball gazing, what are the top two or three specific leadership behaviors that you feel will become crucial for leaders in 2023? Specific two or three leadership behaviors. What's your take on that, Satya?
Yeah, and maybe I'm just going to reiterate some of the things that I said, right, as being important to answer your question. I think one, being long on your people and your business, I feel is very, very important for this decade, right? So India as a country is going to be a lot more exposed to what is happening around the world as we go down, the years and the decades in that sense. So I think, creating a culture that where you can go long on your people and long on your business becomes very important. And the second thing really is that, how do you create a culture that embraces diversity, that embraces inclusivity, that builds an equitable growth organization for your entire company, is just is just something that every leader has to consciously invest in, right? So go long and think of culture as something that will keep expanding over time. And let's just not be too hard on ourselves, right? Let's learn from our mistakes. Let's step off that treadmill for a bit. Let's spend more time with our people and get to know them a little bit more. And then great work will happen now.
That's beautiful. Yeah, really nicely summed up. Be long on your people and business strategy. Look at the decade for India specifically. Create a culture of diversity, equity, and inclusion as leaders. See what role you can play in that. And finally, don't be too hard on yourself. Don't stress it out. And I think that's such a beautiful remark to close on as many of us head off for our vacations and our short breaks. And I know you're heading off, Satya, to a beautiful place. So thanks once again, Satya, for making time and joining us for this Leaders Cafe Trendspotting 2023. I love the chat with you, and I'm sure our viewers did too. I wish you a really, really happy new year and enjoy the time out with your family. You're actually living what you're telling us, and I think that's truly authentic. So thanks once again, Satya.
No, thank you so much, Gatik. Thank you so much, Transform Me. Always great to interact with you all. I'm looking forward to doing more with you next year as well. And yeah, wish you all the best. Have a great Christmas and New Year, and time off. And for one, maybe leave technology behind in this holiday that you're planning.
Aha.
Um, Come back to technology in January. It's not going to go anywhere if you leave it behind.
Beautiful. Thanks, Satya. Have a good one.
You too. Thank you.